So guys, this video is part 3 in our lesson on factoring quadratic trinomials. Specifically in this video, we're going to look at how do we factor quadratics when a is 1. So what I mean by that is if we look at the standard form of a quadratic, which is right here, how do we factor a quadratic that has a 1 right in front of x squared? The answer to that question is we factor those quadratics the same way we factor a quadratic that has something other than 1 in front of x squared. The process is no different. So if we look at an example, we can put a 1 right there in front of x squared. If there's nothing written in front of a variable, it's assumed to be a 1. And you're going to say 1 times 20, which is 20. So then we're going to try and find the two numbers that multiply to 20 and add to 9. So we can list out the factors of 20, the pairs of numbers that multiply to 20, and you want the pair that when you add them together, you get a 9. Well, that's going to be 4 and 5, so we're going to have 1x squared plus 4x plus 5x plus 20. And remember, guys, the order there doesn't matter. If you have the plus 5x and then the plus 4x, that's fine, okay? So then we've got that, so we can split the polynomial in half, and you want to factor the GCF from each half. So if we look at the first half, we've got a 1 and a 4. The only number that goes into 1 and 4 is a 1, so that's not really going to help us out much. But x squared has 2 x's, and then there's 1x in that second term. So we can circle an x in each one of those terms, so that means we can factor out an x. We start our parentheses, the 1 is left where it is, and then there's that 1x that wasn't circled that's going to stay with the 1. The 4 was left alone, so it's going to stay there, but that x was removed completely, so we close off the parentheses. In the second half, the biggest number that goes into 5 and 20 is a 5, and there's not an x with the 20, so we can't factor away an x. So we can start our second set of parentheses. 5 divided by 5 is 1. The x stays there. 20 divided by 5 is 4. And we close off the parentheses. We have the same thing in parentheses in each set. So we are going to bring down one of what they have in common, so one of the 1x plus 4s. And then we're going to group the two pieces that are not in parentheses together. So x plus 5. Here are your factors of your quadratic, okay? Now, normally, again, we don't put a 1 in front of a variable. It's just assumed if there's nothing there that we could really put a 1 there. So most likely on your homework or on an exam, something like that, you would have your factors written like this, just without the 1s, okay? But either one of them is technically correct, okay? Let's do another one. So on this one, same idea. We can put a 1 in front of x squared, and then we're going to multiply that 1 to that negative 24. So now we're trying to find the two numbers that multiply to negative 24 and add to positive 2. So if you're multiplying to get a negative number, that means one of the numbers has to be positive, one has to be negative. This middle number right here, that 2, all right, the number that we want the pair of numbers to add to, since it is positive, that means we want the bigger number in the pair to be positive. If the 2 had been negative, we would want the bigger of the two numbers to be negative. So let's list out then what the pairs of numbers that would multiply to negative 24 are, and we're going to make the bigger of the two numbers positive, the smaller one negative. So we've got negative 1 and 24, negative 2 and 12, negative 3 and 8, and negative 4 and 6. We want the pair that when we add them together, we get a positive 2. So that's going to be negative 4 and 6. So we're going to bring down the 1x squared. Then we have minus 4x plus 6x, and then minus 24. So we're going to split that polynomial in half and then factor our GCF from each half. So 1 and 4, the only number that goes into both of those is a 1, so that's really not that helpful. But we can factor away an x from each one of those terms. Okay, so we can circle an x. We're going to factor away an x. The 1 is left over, as is that x that was not circled. It's going to stay with the 1. The -4, we didn't do anything with it, so it's going to stay there as well. And then the x that was with that -4, it was circled and factored out, so there's not an x to leave with the 4. Then when we look at our second half, we've got a 6 and a 24. The biggest number that goes into 6 and 24 is a 6. We can't factor an x away because the 24 doesn't have one, so we start our parentheses. 6 divided by 6 is 1, and then the x comes along. -24 divided by 6 is -4, and we close off the parentheses. We have the same thing in parentheses, so we're going to bring down one of those, but I'm going to go ahead and write that x minus 4 without the 1, okay, just because that's typically how we'll see it written. And then the x plus 6, we group those together. So there are our factors. Okay, this would be those two binomials together. If you were to multiply them, it would take you back to your original quadratic. Okay? All right, let's do another one. So if we look at this one, guys, we notice that there is a number in front of x squared. So you're going to have to check for a GCF, okay? Well, if you look at 3, 6, and 45, okay, we know that 3 will go into itself. We know that 3 will go into 6, and then 3 will go into 45, okay? And if you're ever not quite sure if a number will go into another one, just type it into your calculator, okay? And then just see if you get a decimal or not. If it doesn't give you a decimal, then you're good. That the number you divided by will go into it evenly, okay? So here, we can factor away a 3. 3 divided by 3 is 1, and then we have the x squared. -6 divided by 3 is -2, and then -45 divided by 3 is -15, okay? So by factoring away that 3, we're now left with just a 1 in front of x squared, okay? So we're good to then go 1 times -15, which is -15. So we're trying to find the two numbers then that multiply to -15 and add to -2. So we're multiplying to get a -15, so that means the two numbers have to have different signs. And because we want them to add to a negative number, that -2, we want the bigger of the two numbers to be negative. So if we write down those factors, we've got 1 and -15, and we've got 3 and -5. Well, 3 plus -5 is -2, so those are the two numbers we want. The 3 on the outside will come down. The parentheses come down, the 1x squared comes down, and then we have plus 3x minus 5x, and we bring down our -15, okay? So then we're good to do our grouping. So we're going to split the polynomial in half. That 3 on the outside is still just going to come down. Because it's there, though, at this one step, we are going to have a bracket, okay? But just at this one step. All right, so now we can factor that first half. We've got a 1 and a 3. There's not a number besides 1 that goes into 1 and 3. So we can't factor away a number, but like in all the others, we can factor away an x because each one of those terms has an x. So we're going to pull out an x and start the parentheses. The 1, we didn't do anything with it, so we're going to leave it there. And there was an x that wasn't circled, so it's going to stay with the 1. Okay, the plus 3, nothing changed with it, but its x was removed, so we're going to close off the parentheses and leave that 3. Then when we look at the second half, that leading coefficient in that second half is negative, and you don't want that. So we're going to factor away a negative number of some sort, and the biggest number that goes into 5 and 15 is 5. So we're actually going to factor away a -5, and there's not an x that we can factor away. So -5 divided by -5 is +1. The x comes along. -15 divided by -5 is +3. And we can close off the parentheses and close off the brackets. All right, so then when we look at the parentheses, we see that we have the same thing, which is good. So to give our final answer, we're going to bring down that 3 on the outside. we're going to put 1 of the 1x plus 3's, okay? Again, without the 1 in front there. And then the two pieces that are inside the brackets but not in parentheses, so the x minus 5, we put those together. So those three things together are the factors of your quadratic. If you were to multiply those, all three of those things together, it would take you back to your original quadratic, okay? And that's it. All right, we're going to do one more. So on this one, we see that there's a negative number in front of x squared, and really it's just a negative 1. So guys, if you ever need to factor away a negative 1, all that's going to happen is you're going to change the signs of all the numbers, okay? So we're going to pull that negative 1 out. Negative 1 divided by negative 1 is positive 1, okay? 20 divided by negative 1 is negative 20. And negative 100 divided by negative 1 is positive 100. So notice we kept the same numbers, but their signs just changed, okay? So then we're good to do like we've been doing. We're going to say 1 times 100, which is 100. And then we're trying to figure out the two numbers that multiply to positive 100 and add to negative 20. So think we're multiplying to get a positive, but the numbers have to add to be a negative. So that means that both of the numbers are going to have to be negative, okay? So if we go through and write down all the possibilities that we can think of, all right, we've got negative 1 and negative 100, negative 2 and negative 50, negative 4, and negative 25. We've got negative 5 and negative 20. And we've got negative 10 and negative 10. We want the pair that when we add them together, we get a negative 100. Or sorry, we get a negative 20. So that's going to be the negative 10 and the negative 10. Negative 10 plus negative 10 is negative 20. And if you multiply negative 10 by negative 10, you get positive 100. So we're going to end up here with negative 1 on the outside. Okay? Then we have our 1x squared minus 10x minus 10x plus 100. Then we're good to split the polynomial in half and factor out the GCF from each half. So we bring down that negative 1, and we're going to start a bracket since we've got that GCF on the outside. There's not a number other than 1 that goes into 1 and 10, so we can't factor out a number. But we can factor away an x, just like we have in every other quadratic that we factored. So we can circle those x's and pull out an x. Then left over in the parentheses, we still have a 1. And the x is still left with the 1, that x that wasn't circled. The negative 10 was left alone, but its x was removed. So we can close off the parentheses. In the second half there, our leading coefficient is negative, which we don't want, so we're going to factor away a negative. And we look at 10 and 100. The biggest number that goes into 10 and 100 is 10, so we can factor out a negative 10, and there's not an x to remove because the 100 doesn't have one. So negative 10 divided by negative 10 is positive 1. The x comes along. 100 divided by negative 10 is negative 10. So we can close off the parentheses and the brackets. We have the same thing in parentheses, okay? So we can bring down the negative 1 on the outside there. But normally, guys, if it's a negative, just a negative 1, you're normally just going to see the negative sign. But if you actually write the negative 1 there, it's okay, all right? But typically, you'll just see a negative sign. So we're going to bring down one of the x minus 10s in the parentheses, but then the two pieces that are inside the brackets but not in parentheses, we need to group those together as well, okay? So we'll have actually another x minus 10. So this would be your factored form of your original quadratic. Now, one last thing on this one is whenever you have, when your factors are exactly the same numbers, same signs, some of the time you might see it written another way. you will have it written as x minus 10 squared, and then if you have a GCF outside of the parentheses, so here we've got that -1, you just put it right outside, okay? This is basically like a shorthand way of writing out the factors that we just found. Either one of them is acceptable, but just some of the time you'll see it written different ways. All the 2 means is to write the x minus 10 twice, which is what we actually have over there, okay? So guys, that's it. Factoring these quadratics where you either have from the beginning just a 1 in front of x squared, or if you factor away a number and you're left with just 1 in front of x squared. You go about factoring those in the exact same way that you would if any other number were in front of x squared, okay?